Hello, this is the third mini lecture for week 12 on artistic movements associated with modernism in the early 20th century. Hope everybody's doing okay. I know the music is pretty crazy this week, so hang in there. Things are going to get wild here with Expressionism. This would be probably a good time for me to remind you that all of these movements that we're discussing, Impressionism, Expressionism, Primitivism, Cubism, Fauvism, all of them fall under the heading of modernism. All of these different categories of artists, all these groups can be described generally as modernists because they were all trying to make it new, trying to make that break with the past. So let's have a look at how expressionism fits that description. In our first lecture of this series of 3, we talked about Impressionism, and I mentioned that Impressionism is strongly associated with France. Initially, all of the important artists associated with that style were French, although later the style spread and many other artists adopted it, including some American artists. Expressionism is just as strongly associated with Germany and the German-speaking countries. And in many ways, Expressionism was a reaction against Impressionism. There are certain things that the Expressionists valued about Impressionism, particularly their use of color and light. You see a lot of similar gestures in Expressionism as you do in Impressionism in those respects. But while Impressionism often studied the natural world and depicted scenes from the world around us, Expressionists tried to delve into the psychological reality that is beneath that visible world. And they were strongly influenced by the ideas of Sigmund Freud, and particularly his theory of the subconscious. The Expressionist artists felt that art was a good way for artists and also their audiences to explore that subconscious mind that we are otherwise not aware of. So frequently what you see in Expressionist art is a scene that has some elements of realism, but often it's distorted or altered in some way that is intended to suggest sort of a deeper psychological reality beneath what's visible. So for instance, in this painting, which is by Oskar Kokoschka, Kokoschka was actually a Russian painter who moved to Vienna, and this painting has what appear to be a man and a woman lying in, they're reclining. We're not quite sure where they are. Might make sense for them to be in bed, but kind of hard to tell where the bed is. Instead, they're part of this sort of swirling, dreamlike, maybe even nightmarish composition. We see what looks like maybe a landscape in the background, a circle up at the sort of upper right center that might be the moon or something, but hard to tell. And when you look at the two figures, the woman is painted rather realistically, but the man, I often say that if you look in the mirror and look like that, then you probably need to seek medical attention because he does not look that great. So, I think that we're meant to infer some sort of trouble in this scene, some sort of psychological anxiety or fear or something somewhat disturbing in this scene. Just as Debussy tried to translate the French Impressionist aesthetic into music, the composer Arnold Schoenberg is credited with being one of the first to translate the German Expressionist aesthetic into music. And like Wagner, Schoenberg wrote a lot about what he was trying to do in his music. And he really believed that in the future, people were going to listen to music in a different way. That by writing music in a new style, he was going to sort of educate and inculcate listeners to hear music in a different way that would make it more meaningful for them. And one of the things that Schoenberg argues is that when listening to a piece of traditional tonal music, where the music is organized around a single tonic pitch, and there are cadences that emphasize that tonic pitch, Schoenberg argued that those cadences are really not very interesting because we always know where they're going. You know, the listener has an anticipation for what the cadence is going to lead to. He said that, you know, what's really interesting is the journey that gets you there. It's the series of dissonances that lead you to that consonance that marks the cadence. So Schoenberg believed that it would be sort of make music more ultimately meaningful to get rid of those cadences, those consonances, and just focus on the dissonances. So Schoenberg actually coined this term, the emancipation of dissonance, that basically said that all combinations of pitches, all chords, could be treated equally, whether they were consonant or whether they were extremely dissonant. This, in a way, is the logical endpoint of what Debussy started to do when he started using harmony in a non-functional way, by sort of making it so that chords no longer lead to cadences, so that harmonies no longer emphasize a central tonic pitch. This is sort of the final outgrowth of that idea. It's taken to its ultimate extreme. But whereas, as I mentioned, Debussy favors generally consonant sonorities, Schoenberg instead prefers to emphasize the dissonant side. Schoenberg is also more careful to make sure that there is no sense of tonal center in his music. He really tries in his works to make sure that all 12 pitches are treated democratically. All 12 pitches of the chromatic scale, all the available pitches in Western music are treated democratically and equally. The term that Schoenberg preferred for this was pantonality, all the pitches, all the tones. But the term that's usually used to describe this style is atonality, which Schoenberg didn't like the term because it sounds like there are no tones, atonality, no tone. But really what it is no tonic. There's no central pitch in Schoenberg's music. And later in his career, Schoenberg developed a system called the 12-tone system, or sometimes called serialism, because he arranged the 12 pitches in a series, so that's why it's called serialism, that was sort of a standardized approach to how to create this no tonic system. But early in his career, which is the music we're going to study is from early in Schoenberg's career, there wasn't really a system yet. Schoenberg just uses dissonances and actively avoids any sense of cadence or tonal center in these early works. So since, once again, harmony is no longer an organizing principle in this music, again, timbre and tone color become more important as a musical element. And I think you might have noticed by now that those three words, importance of timbre, have appeared in every one of my many lectures. So that is definitely a common aspect of these modernist movements in music. Schoenberg was active in Vienna. He actually had met Sigmund Freud. And he had two composition students who adopted his ideas and ultimately became great composers in their own right, and their names are Alban Berg and Anton Webern. And the three of them together, Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern, are often referred to as the second Viennese school of composers. The first Viennese school would be Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So that's a pretty complimentary way to refer to them, but they are often referred to by that description. One of Schoenberg's earliest works that explored this new idea of atonality is a set of 21 songs. It's a cycle of songs. And what I mean by a cycle is that all of the songs are related to each other. They don't exactly tell a story, but they all focus on the same character, and they have they have some dramatic aspects to them. So they are to get this set of 21 songs are intended to work together as a set. And each one of the 21 songs is generally very short, on 5 minutes or less, and some of them are very short. The title of this song cycle is Pierrot Lunaire. It's a French name, and it actually was the text for the songs comes from a Belgian poet who wrote in French. And Schoenberg had the text translated into German so that he could set them to music. The central figure of this set of songs is a character who would have been familiar from puppet shows that were intended for children. So this is a theatrical tradition in Europe that dated back actually as far as the Renaissance. It's called the Commedia dell'arte. Originated in Italy, but these types of puppet shows featuring these characters were popular all across Europe. In England, they were called Punch and Judy shows. In Russia, the main character was called Petrushka, and as I mentioned, Stravinsky wrote one of his ballets based on that character. And the French name for this character was Pierrot. And all the characters in the Commedia dell'arte, in these puppet shows that were intended for children, all of them were characters in a circus. And the central character is Pierrot, and Pierrot is a clown, but he's kind of a sad clown. Like, he's a clown on the outside, but his character is often kind of depicted as sad and brooding, and a lot of the stories have to do with Pierrot's love for another character in the circus whose name is Columbine, a woman whose named for a flower, the Columbine flower. And Pierrot's rival for her affections is an acrobat in the circus whose name is Harlequin. So these are characters that would have been familiar to Schoenberg's audience from their time as children. Like, it's the sort of thing where if you went to a fair or a carnival, there would probably be somebody set up with this puppet theater acting out little stories with these characters. So it's almost like a character from children's literature. But the poems that Schoenberg sets to music explore the deeper inner psychological reality of Pierrot. When we find out that Pierrot is a pretty disturbed character. Indeed, the texts of the poems are kind of an exploration of depression and extreme mental illness in some poems. And the title, Pierrot Lunaire, literally means Pierrot under the influence of the moon. And you know, the moon is a symbol in a lot of literature for mental illness. The word lunatic comes from that idea of being under the influence of the moon, which is constantly changing its appearance, right? So the moon is a symbol throughout these poems. And in order to set these poems to music, Schoenberg employs a soprano voice and a chamber ensemble of instruments. Schoenberg did not have the financial resources that Stravinsky had, so he couldn't get together a huge, enormous orchestra like Stravinsky did for The Rite of Spring. So he has 5 performers in the chamber ensemble: flute, clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. But he gets as much tone color out of those instruments as possible by having the flute double on piccolo. So there are some songs where instead of flute, the flute player plays piccolo. The clarinet player sometimes plays bass clarinet, and the violin player sometimes plays viola. So he's really, even within a small ensemble, exploring tone color as much as possible. And perhaps the most striking aspect of these songs is the vocal style of the singer. Instead of having the singer sing in the traditional fashion, Schoenberg has the singer read the poems in a style where the singer approximates pitches, but is instructed to not sing directly on the pitch and to slide between the pitches as much as possible. Schoenberg invented this style of singing for this piece, and he called it Sprechstimme. That's the last word there on the slide, which is kind of a speech song. And the result is that the singer sings in a style that I like to say sounds like every ghost from every dream sequence of every movie and TV show you've ever seen. So, when a ghost character comes in, they frequently don't talk like a normal person. They talk like this. They go like, "Hamlet, I am your father, avenge my death." That kind of like sing-songy thing that supernatural characters do. That's what Sprechstimme sounds like. And it allows the singer to explore a lot of vocal qualities and styles that ordinarily they wouldn't. So sometimes shouting or whispering or different things are all possible within the Sprechstimme style. So with those interesting tone colors, the interesting singing style, and the atonal harmonic context, Pierrot Lunaire really does give the sense of a deep psychological exploration. And I'm going to have you listen to 3 songs from Pierrot. I want you to listen to the first song, which is called Drunk with Moonlight, or Moon Drunk. The second song I'm going to have you listen to is one titled Night. And the third song I'm going to have you listen to is called The Fleck of Moonlight, or The Moon Fleck. And the reason I chose these 3 is that they really have different tempos, so they project some different characters, but they also use the ensemble in different ways. I want you to notice how in the second song that I'm having you listen to, Night, Schoenberg really emphasizes the low instruments, the cello, the bass clarinet, the piano and its low register. And then in the third song, it's the opposite. He emphasizes all the high instruments, piccolo, violin, and clarinet and their high register, piano and its high register. You'll hear a lot of ostinato patterns in the accompaniment to these songs. Little musical motives that are repeated over and over. So in the first song, the first thing you hear is the piano plays a 7-note descending ostinato. You can count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It just keeps coming back, repeating. You hear it first in the piano, and then the other instruments start to pick it up too. So you can listen for that. I like to remind students when they listen to Pierrot Lunaire that this piece was written in 1913 and premiered in 1913. And The Rite of Spring also was premiered in 1913. And 1913 was a time of great anxiety in Europe. It was right at the start, right before World War I, and the political situation that led to the First World War, which, as you know, was a devastating event for Europe. Those political circumstances were already in place when these pieces were being written. So the violence of The Rite of Spring, the dark character of Pierrot Lunaire, I think is in many ways a response to that very anxious, very dark time in European history. So, with that as a background, give Pierrot a listen, and write me some comments on our discussion board this week about what you're listening to in these pieces.